Hello. Good morning, everybody. It's really good to see you. We are in Luke's Gospel, chapter 15. We'll begin reading in a few minutes with verse 11, and we'll read down to the end of verse 32. Now, while you're turning there or while you're getting ready to read off the screen, let me do a little bit of teaching, okay? And I want you to promise me that your eyes will not glaze over, that you will not doze off. A fellow at the early service said, Ernie, I thought that was very interesting, but I did go to sleep. Thanks for the confession. I appreciate it. Confession is good for the heart. Well, anyway, at the beginning of chapter 15, Jesus is eating dinner with tax collectors and other sinners. And the Pharisees show up. Yes, those guys again. They are the chief antagonists of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. And they begin to criticize Jesus for eating with sinners. And so he tells three parables, one after the other, that are parables because they have a parable quality to them, a story. And they only teach one spiritual truth, but they also have an allegory quality to them. Allegories are stories that are more elaborate than parables, and each character or thing in the story will stand for something else outside the story. So, for example, in the first parable, when the sheep wanders away from the sheep pen, the shepherd who goes out and gets the sheep is obviously meant to stand for Jesus, who goes out and brings sinners in, back to the fold, back to God. And then in the third story, I'm going to be reading just a moment to you, the father here, the father of the two sons, obviously stands for God. So they're kind of like hybrids between parables and allegories. So our Lord hears the criticism of the Pharisees. He tells these three stories one after the other, and the quality or the thing that they have in common is lostness. There's a lost sheep who is brought back to the sheepfold. There's a lost coin. It was a 1909 Lincoln penny, VDB. I know you're not a numismatist, but that's one of the most expensive coins in the world. $15 million for a 1909 Lincoln penny. Go through your change. A woman loses this very rare coin, falls in the floorboards, and she tears the house apart to find the coin, to restore it to herself. And then this parable, the parable sometimes called the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal is an old-fashioned word, means somebody who wanders away or goes away and lives wildly. Really the parable of the lost son. He tells this story as well. Now at the end of this parable, we meet the older brother. Now, I'm not going to talk about him in the message itself, so I'm going to do it now to help you understand where the older brother fits into this and why the Lord mentions him. You see, the Pharisees had the law, the prophets, they had Moses, they had their religion and their faith, they had God, they had everything, and yet they were critical of the people who were lost and had nothing. And that really made no sense because the reason the Pharisees existed should have been to reach out to people and bring them into the kingdom just like that they were already in the kingdom. And so our Lord tells the story of the lost son and puts the elder brother at the end because the older brother resented the fact that the younger brother had been reached, he was lost but was found. He complained, I've never received anything from you, and this brother of mine who went out and spent your money on prostitutes, he comes home and you welcome him and love him. And the father says, listen, you have everything I have. You Pharisees, you have everything I have. But this younger brother of yours was lost, but now he's found. You know, lostness is really what Jesus was about. And these religious leaders of his day need to understand that God loved them. God would receive them if they had faith as well. But he was there for people who didn't have the things and the benefits that the leaders had. In Luke 19, we have the story of Zacchaeus, that little man. And maybe I'll get a chance to preach on him in a few months. But in that story, Jesus says, the Son of Man has come. Are you listening now? This is the motto of Jesus. This is his slogan. This is what he was about. If you ever want to say to yourself or ask yourself, what was Jesus about? Here's the answer. The Son of Man, Jesus said, has come to seek and save those who are lost. He's come for lost people. Now, with that in mind, let's begin reading verse 11 of chapter 15. Jesus continues. In other words, there's two parables. This is the third parable. He continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Now, in original language, it means give me the income from the estate. As the months went by, the father had property. There were people who rented the property from him. He had also flocks and other kinds of things that he owned. And there was income coming in from those investments. So he didn't actually give the property to the son. He gave the income for a finite amount of time. So it was a finite amount of money that was involved here. It wasn't a great deal. It was more than the son had ever seen before. It was enough to go off and live wild, but it was a small amount of money, relatively speaking. Not long after that, the youngest son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to the citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods. Now, in the original language, this is carob pods. If you're a health nut, you know what carob is. It's sometimes used as a replacement for chocolate. This was not health food. So he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Now, verse 17, the first part is very important. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the oldest son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing." This was not a Baptist party. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. You've never even given me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." I'm not sure that celebrating eating a goat is the way I want to go, but that's just me. "But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you'll kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Jesus is all about people who are lost. But let's not lose that word lost. We're in danger of it. When someone says lost, they think, what does that mean? One denomination, this is actually true. A Christian denomination said, "You have come to seek and save the lost? I was never lost. I've always been found." It's a big bumper sticker, isn't it? Well, you see, even some Christians are losing the idea of lostness. And what it means is because of your choice and your decision, how you've lived your life, the direction you've gone in, you've gone away from God. Because of your sin, you've lost a relationship with God. To God, you're lost. Here's a young man who asked his father, "Give me the income from what will one day be my inheritance." And the father gave it to him. Now, keep that in mind. I'm going to do a callback to the story of the lost sheep. This is Throwback Sunday. Now, the parable of lost sheep, remember, the sheep was in the sheep pen, 100 sheep. The pen had been established by the shepherd, had been built very strong to keep out the lion, to keep out the wolves. But one of those sheep said, I want to go out and live my own kind of life the way I want to. Now, by the way, some people don't like the word stupid. I'm sorry, but that's just stupid. Of course, sheep are stupid. This sheep had everything he could ever want, safety and food, and a shepherd to care for him, but he wanted to leave and find out what it was like on the outside of the sheep pen, and he went. Now, if you're part of that group that doesn't think losses exist any longer, the shepherd says, I'm going to go out there and see how that sheep is doing. So he goes and finds the sheep, and he says, okay, sheep, I want to affirm you in your faith journey. I want to see how you're doing because we miss you back there, but it's okay, we miss you, but you can do whatever you want to do. Let me scratch you behind the ear. We're not really worried about you that much. Go ahead and be lost. And the shepherd goes back to the sheep pen and forgets about the sheep. No, he doesn't do that. He says, sheep, you left because you're stupid. You don't know what's good for you. And so I'm going to get you by all four legs. I'm going to wrap you around my neck. I showed you this picture from my childhood. Hope you remember a few months ago of the good shepherd Jesus with the sheep around his neck. He takes the sheep. He says, I don't care if you want to go back or not. You're going back. And he takes him back to where he's safe. Now, I want you to see that this place which is safe is the church, where the shepherd Jesus takes care of his sheep. This is the family of God. And that sheep without the family of God is defenseless. On the other hand now, you have the story of the Father and the Son. And this is different. He says, son, if you want to go, I'm not going to hold on to you. You just go. But the Father recognized that the more he tried to keep his son, the farther he was pushing his son away. And so he practices tough love. He gives him a little bit of money and lets the son leave and go away. Sometimes the right approach is to practice tough love. Say, listen, you have done so many things that are wrong for so long a period of time. I'm just going to let you go because you need to find out on your own how bad things are. Now, which approach is it that's best? To go out and get the lost one or to let the lost one go? I don't know, except that when it happens, you need to pray to God for wisdom. How am I going to treat this situation right now where I am? Should I hold on or should I let go? This father let go. And his son goes out and is lost. And it broke the father's heart. He worried about him every day. Because you see, for God the Father and for Jesus the Son, the most important person in the world is the person who's lost. Now, when I first had my sons, we would go out with them, like anybody would go out with their kids. And we were at J.C. Penney, a company which is getting ready to go out of business. So if you have any layaways, hurry up. We were at J.C. Penney. Josh was about 4 or 5 years old. And just a few years before, Adam Walsh had disappeared at a Sears. Now, John Walsh is his dad. John is pretty famous. He had a show called America's Most Wanted, and he also advertises a number of different security things, and you see him on TV. Well, that all started because his son, Adam, was stolen by a man in Sears. Just for a moment, he turned around, looked back, his son wasn't there. His son was taken, abused, and murdered. Just a little kid. And so we were at J.C. Penney, and my wife and I were at a counter, and Josh was standing beside us, and I turned around and looked, and Josh was gone. Now, I want to tell you that I wasn't calm. I freaked out. I was scared to death. And I tore that store apart in order to find Josh. And it took about 15 minutes. And every minute that went by, I got closer and closer to thinking my son was lost. And then I saw him darting through the crowd. My son Josh was skinny as a rail. This is not going to mean anything to you because you're not a golfer, but I used to call him the human one iron because he was so thin. And I saw him darting through the crowd, and look on his face, he was scarier than me because he realized he was lost, and he knew what that meant. He was petrified. And when I saw him and when I got him back, I held him close because he was lost to me. Now he was found. That was his father. He cared about his son who was lost. Remember, if you're lost to God, you're the most important person in all the world to him. He cares for you. He loves you. He wants you to come back. But God will not hold you. He will let you live your life the way you want to live your life until you're ready for him. Now, we want to take a little turn here. Make it really about you and who you are. When do lost people come back to God? Are you listening? When they come to their senses. Does it make any sense to be like the sheep who wandered away from the sheep pen? No, it's stupid. Does it make any sense to be part of a nice household where people love you and care for you and say, no, I don't want this anymore, and go out and live a wild life? Makes no sense whatsoever. This young man's life began to change when he came to his senses. He had this money, and he wasted it all very quickly. I was reading about this. It's not about Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp's an actor, you know, and he's famous for doing kind of weird and wacky roles. I was reading that in his career, he has earned $850 million from his various roles. Now, you can take $850 million and put it in the bank, get 4% a year. That's $32 million plus. I got to tell you something. If you gave me $1 million and said spend it, I think I could probably get through 500,000 of it, one of which would be pay off my house. But then the next 500,000, I'm not sure I could, what would I do with that? I couldn't find ways to spend it. He bought 3 or 4 islands in the Caribbean. He would walk into a Ferrari or a Lamborghini dealership, and he would buy one on the spot and drive it out. Of course, he's been married several times too, and that was a very costly experience for him. I didn't want you to laugh, but you did anyway. And now he's down to just a few $1 million. He could have had an allowance of $32 million a year, but he spent all his money. He squandered it all. Yeah, you can waste everything you have. You can. This man had friends. He partied. Prostitutes. He partied. And then one day a famine came to the country he was living in. All the money was gone. He had nothing to eat. There were no friends. None of the ladies he had dated were there. He had absolutely nothing. He hired himself out to a man of that country, just a hired hand. He worked in the fields. Eventually, he was assigned to work in the pig pen. Now, this is a good Jewish boy, and he's laying down with pigs. He's gone from being in the main house to being in the outhouse. Forgive me for acting like a preacher. That sounded like a preacher talk, didn't it? So he lost everything. Now he's laying in a pig pen, eating the carrot pods that the pigs are eating. Now, this reminded me of a poem. Now, funny poems and bad poetry have a name. The name is doggerel. Let's start, I'll let you know that. Doggerel. Here's a piece of doggerel. It was a year ago, September, a day I well remember. I was walking up and down in drunken pride, when my knees began to flutter, and I fell down in the gutter, and a pig came by and lay down by my side. As I lay there in the gutter, thinking in thoughts I could not utter, I thought I heard a lady passing by say, "You can tell a man who boozes by the company he chooses," and with that, the pig got up and walked away. So I got this picture on mine. There's this young guy in the pig pen, laying down. He's got his arm around a pig. He says, "You're my last friend." And the pig gets up and walks away. And he came to his senses. He said, "Back home, my father's hired men live better lives than I'm living. So I'm going to go back to him and say, I have sinned against heaven." Now, heaven was a way of saying God without actually saying God's name out of respect for God. So I've sinned against God. I've sinned against you. Now, you remember the commandments, honor your father and mother. So he had sinned against God by breaking the commandment and against his father by not respecting him. I want you to take me back as one of your hired men. I'll just work in your fields. That all came about. His decision to change his life came when he came to his senses. want to ask you and people watching by computer at home, are you ready to come to your senses? Do you understand that if you live a life outside of God, you're lost? You're lost to God, you're lost to yourself. And there are even people, and I've met many recently, who used to be in a church, who used to be part of God's family, but the world and the things of the world look more attractive and they wandered away. Don't you want to come back? You came this morning. You're here this morning, maybe for the first time in some months or some years. Don't you want to come to your senses? Don't you want to come back? Now here's the next idea. Are you listening to me? Nobody can fall too far. There is no sin that God cannot forgive. There's nothing anybody can do that the Father won't receive you back gladly and forgive you. There's nothing you can do. This father was thinking about his son. He said, oh, he's out there. And I get the picture that he was on the road, the father was on the road to the house, looking down every day, trying to see if maybe his son was coming home. Because you see, in the story, he saw him right away. And he saw a speck one day, and the speck got a little bit bigger, and pretty soon he recognized the distinctive way his son walked and the way his son moved. That's my son! And the son came up with his memorized speech, how he's going to convince his father to take him back. Father, I've sinned against heaven, I've sinned against you. He never got a chance to finish the speech. The father put his arms around him and kissed him. At that moment, because his son had come to his senses and come home, he forgave him completely, totally. He said, listen, you go, you get a robe, put it on his shoulders. You get the ring and put it on his finger, the ring of authority. He's my son again. Let's kill the fattened calf. Now, what's the fattened calf? You always hear about this in Scripture. What's a fattened calf? Well, it's a young steer that they feed lots of food and make it fat so the meat is well marbled. They didn't do this with all the cows. They did it to a special one. And when they had a party, they killed this very expensive, this very well cared for fattened calf. Let's have some marbled meat this evening. What's for dinner? Meat. Big party. Dancing and singing. Because the son was lost, but now he's found. The father had his son on his mind every single day. I have an app on my phone called Find Friends. Now, that's the Apple app. I don't know what the Android phones have. It's probably something very similar. And so I have people in my family that I've invited to be my friend, and they've invited me back. And so I can follow where my sons and where my daughters-in-laws are, not to spy on them, but simply so I can know where they are if they're coming to meet me or they have a problem or cars broken down, or I can find where they are. Sometimes my wife is coming home from Greenbrier, where she's out spending her allowance. I have one, she has one, and I can follow her on the interstate coming home, and usually she stops close to the high-rise bridge and stays there for a while. There's her dots, frozen in space and time. And they follow me too. When my family goes to Disney World, Cal and Sterling just went to Disney World, I can see them on my phone and even know what ride they're riding at the time. Now, Cliff one time invited me to be one of his friends, to follow him. And I thought, this is great. I can see where Cliff is going. Maybe he's going to the shaving store at MacArthur Mall. Maybe he's going to buy cigars at the cigar store. I can know then, I can know where he is. But it turned out it was a mistake. He took it back in 15 minutes. I was so hurt. I thought for sure I was going to be able to follow him around. Now, I don't think the father had an app on his phone. I don't think he was knowing exactly where his son was. But I know one thing. The son was on the father's mind every second of every day, and he was praying, he was hoping, he was desiring that his son come home. And his son came home. What he'd been wanting. And he instantly forgave him. I'd be a really bad politician. I really would. I think I could run things pretty good, but the politician part of it, telling stories, telling lies, cutting people off at the knees, being mean and vicious, that's just not me. I couldn't do it. And, you know, infanticide is something that really bothers me. That we've gotten to the point in our nation that we're killing babies. Really bothers me. But other things I can forgive really easily. When I first came pastor 29 years ago, can you believe that? I was so young back then. 29 years ago. When I first became pastor, I had a long, hard period because the church was growing and changing, and a lot of folks didn't like it, so that lasted some number of years, probably 7. And during that time, people said really ugly things to me, did terrible things to me, egged my house, knocked on my doors in the middle of the night, called me on the phone, hung the phone up. Now I get calls all the time, but they're from New Jersey, and they're trying to sell me something. And they even poured chocolate syrup down the gas tank of my car and ruined my engine. And all those people, I forgive them. It's not even hard for me to. I don't care. I know it was hard for them back then. I forgive them. Because, you know, forgiveness is a godly quality. So I'd be a very bad politician. Somebody does something bad, I go, I forgive you. Let's go on, do whatever I have to do, you know. This is what God does. God says, you have been lost to me. You have lived a life very far from me. I've had people tell me, Pastor, I can't go to church. Why? If I did, the roof would fall in. What does he mean by that? When they say that? I've been such a bad person. If I go to church, God will punish the whole church and the roof will fall in. But you don't understand how God works. If you have made a decision to come to your senses and come back to Him, He forgives you completely and totally. Maybe you've wandered away from God. Maybe you're lost to Him. Maybe you used to be part of God's family, part of His church, but you've wandered away from church. You come back to God, He will forgive you.